Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Kirby Squeak Squad. In the last part, we finished off World 2 and started off Cushy Cloud here, World 3, and now we're going to continue on and do more of that. With that said, at the end of the last part, we actually got, I think technically speaking, our second fragment of a secret map. That is another thing that will do nothing until we have the entire set, but worth noting they are pretty important to get if you like experimenting around or if you're having trouble getting certain abilities for certain chests. This level is going to have two new mechanics for us to talk about, albeit only one of them is actually a new mechanic from my memory to the series. The other one's been around since Kirby's Adventure, and that's the one we're going to see first. In specific, in this next room, there's going to be a fire enemy we're going to want to grab, because let's talk about fuses and cannons. Fuses are ropes you see that you can light on fire with things like the fire wheel, fire itself, or laser, and they'll slowly or quickly, in some cases, approach the cannon, and if you're in the cannon when it goes off, you get shut off. We need to do this to get this next chest. And that chest was surrounded by the second mechanic, the clouds of Cushy Cloud. They are effectively walls, but they can actively be burned away by, I think, any specific ability that uses anything fire-related. There might even be more that can destroy them, I'm just not sure about, but fire is what you're meant to use in most cases, to the point where they usually spawn a fire enemy or bubble near clouds that you need to destroy them. These lead to some interesting moments in some rooms where you can really just completely ignore the level design and literally burn through it. And in some regards, they want you to do that, but you need to be careful because sometimes they'll hide platforms beneath the clouds like this. Other times, there's just gonna be a bottomless pit. So you need to be careful not to get too aggressive with where you're burning. We did just get the bubble for UFO as an ability there, but I'll talk about that when I actively use it. Just know that it's consistently one of the best power-ups in any game it's in, because even dating back to its earliest entry, I think it was one of the only abilities that could do multiple things. This is actively one of the rooms where it really pays to have the ability to scroll for fire so you can actively move the fire up or down slightly. Because to get this chest, we need to actively destroy the lower bomb block first so we have access to the area. And then destroy the upper one so we can grab it as it falls. If you destroy them in the opposite order, that chest is falling into the pit before you can reach it. So last part we started talking a lot about the game's staff and went into the, I think, planner and programming teams. Now it's time for us to talk about the design team, which is, I think, the largest individual section listed on Moby Games. In specific, the design team is Masanori Kusamoto, Abeno Matsuzaki, Shiho Tsutsuji, Erika Makino, Tomoko Fukumoto, Toshifumi Onishi, Tomoki Hamuro, Teruyuki Hirooka, Daisuke Sakane, Satoshi Ueda, Haruyo Ueda, Hiroko Yagi, Yoshimi Ueda, and Takumi Nakamura. Starting off that list at the top, Masanori Kusamoto started off with some SNK games like Capcom vs. SNK and its Pro version, Samurai Shodown Pocket Fighting series and all that, Guilty Gear Isuka, Dolphin Blue. But after that, they're on some projects we've already talked about so far in this LP. Sacred Stones, they were in the Special Thanks. Minish Cap, they were on management. Squeak Squad, they were on the design team here. Superstar Ultra, they were in the Special Thanks. Pokemon Ranger Shadows of Almia, they were on some graphic management. P-Cross 3D and Personal Trainer Walking, Special Thanks and Mass Attack. But their most recent projects are in Sam Show Neo Geo Collection for Engines Company Limited, and they were an executive manager on Shadow Labyrinth. Notably, at the end of that stage, we got the ability scroll for the high jump ability, which we've used before in the LP. You press the attack button, you fly up really high in the air really fast and do some good damage. That adds an area of effect to your high jump that's like a sphere of energy around you that just increases your hitbox, and I think maybe increases the damage you deal. Pretty good, especially considering high jump is pretty good against a lot of airborne boss fights in general, as we'll show off across the LP. Next up in the design team was Abeno Matsuzaki. They started on Amazing Mirror in the design team than they were on after this, as well as Superstar Ultra. They were in the Special Thanks for P-Cross 3D UI designer for Personal Trainer Walking, and they were on the design team for Kirby Mass Attack, and that's as far as we know of what they've done. Shiho Tsutsuji, though, started on Deadly Arts on the N64 as a designer. They were in the Special Thanks for Amazing Mirror, graphic designer for Sacred Stones, Squeak Squad, and Superstar Ultra, as well as Mass Attack. They were still on the design team there, UI designer for Personal Trainer Walking, and an animator for Barbie and the Three Musketeers on the DS, which is very out of nowhere compared to everything else on that list. Next up is Erina Makino. Squeak Squad is their last listed project as a designer, but they were also on the graphics team for Sacred Stones, Special Thanks for Amazing Mirror, and they did a lot of work for Samurai Shodown, the Neo Geo, Samurai Shodown 3 in arcades on the Saturn, and Samurai Spirit's Kenkaku Yubi Non-Pack on the PlayStation. In specific, they did a lot of character design and animation on that, I believe. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Tomoko Fukumoto, much smaller credits list. Amazing Mirror, they were in the Special Thanks. Eternal Sonata, they were on the string section for the music for that game, which if you haven't heard the soundtrack to Eternal Sonata, a lot of it's going to sound familiar, but it's some of my favorite variations of some of those songs. Similarly, they were on the graphic design team for Sacred Stones, and then this was their last project here as a designer. Toshifumi Onishi, though, I believe is a name we've talked about before on the channel. They started on Sidearms Hyperdyne on the TurboGrafx 16, as well as its Sidearm Special on the CD. But then they were an object designer for Mega Man's 4, 6, and 7. They did some scrolling background designs for Street Fighter 2, so they were on the sprite work team there pretty much. Nagano Winter Olympics 98, they were a 3D modeler. Sacred Stones, graphic design. Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Assault, special thanks, which that game's got some fantastic sprite work, by the way. Power Rangers SPD on the GBA, they were producer. Squeak Squad, they were designer. Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island and Attack of the Toy Bots, they were a producer and vice president of development. But their more recent things are things like Little Witch Academia, Chamber of Time as a designer, and Shing! With an exclamation point on Windows, they were a director of marketing. By the way, that was the extra stage for this world. It's largely just a maze in the tree trunks, but it's one of the first cases we've seen where there are times where Squeak Squad members will actively follow you from room to room that they're allowed to actively track you to get the large chest back. Especially if the room you get the chest in, you're already next to the door that you need to leave it. And that's probably one of Strippy's best rooms in the game because they do a really good job of keeping up with you at large. To the point where that's why they have switches you can press across that room that will raise spikes up and down to try and do extra damage to Strippy along the way. This is a underutilized mechanic in the game, I think. The thunderclouds here in this stage actively will get electrified if you use the spark ability on them. And that just makes you an even larger walking hitbox. It's fantastic. Speaking of fantastic, this is UFO, one of my favorite abilities whenever it's available. Not only does it give you full 8-directional movement at all times, what its attack does depend on what you're doing. By default, if you just tap the button, you do effectively the equivalent to beam from the beam ability. But if you hold down the B button, you actively start charging up a laser. And at max power, I think it's one of the strongest attacks Kirby gets in most of his games. It takes a good bit to charge up, but trust me, it's worth having around. Unfortunately, it's also one of the rarest abilities in any game it's in, for pretty good reason. Then we get the School for Tornado, which I don't think I actively show off what that does across the LP. I want to say from memory it effectively gives it the same ability that Wheel gets from its ability scroll, so if you touch like ice or fire, it becomes that element of a tornado, which can be pretty neat, but not really showcasing it. Boss of Cushy Cloud looks a little familiar. It looks like Krako, but if you can't tell based on the way the spikes look, this is Mecha-Krako specifically. A lot of the attacks are pretty familiar. Various sweeps across the land. You can spawn in some Waddle Dees or some high jump Starman enemies to get you some abilities if you're low. The most dangerous thing about this fight is that the floor is destructible because it's made of the same clouds we've already talked about. Both Mecha-Krako itself, piloted by Doc, or you with fire abilities can destroy it and cause a couple of different things to happen. But that said, I think you're never out of luck if you're running out of clouds. I believe even in Phase 1, if you almost destroy the entire floor, Mecha-Krako will spawn in a platform like this. But the further you get down their health, the different the layouts will get. It could be a single platform, it could be 2 or 3 across the area. You need to be a bit careful. Mecha-Krako's worst attacks, I think, are when it completely surrounds itself in electricity because the hitbox is so large. Be it when it does the attack it just did, or when it thunders down a couple of different rains of it across. Also dangerous if you almost die like that, because the knockback from Kirby getting electrified in this game is long enough where if it happens to you and you don't die, you're going to be pixels away from falling into that pit. It gets tight. Honestly, probably top 3 hardest Krako adjacent fights in the series off the top of my head, if only for the bottomless pits. On top of the fact you technically have to fight it twice for a single fight because of the 2 health bars deal we saw go on there. With our duties done in Cushy Cloud, we're moving on to World 4. I believe this is Jam Jungle off the top of my head. I might have the first word wrong. No, Jam Jungle, I got it right. This is probably my overall favorite world in the game. If it's not this one, it's probably the second to last world. But that's just because I really like the tile sets here largely. That's a mechanic I haven't talked about yet that's been around since World 1. Occasionally you'll see these little fire jars littered across the map. Destroying one of those makes fire go around and burn nearby wood, but it's almost always in a set area. It doesn't really ever have a threat to it. Pretty much anytime you see that, you want to destroy them to either open up a new pathway for an item, or especially to get a treasure chest in most cases. In the meanwhile, as I go through this level, next up in the design team is Tomoki Hamuro. Their first project was Big Mountain 2000 on the N64, then they were on the Game Boy Color version of Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. After that, Time Force Game Boy Color, Medarot Navi Kuwagata, so one of the Game Boy Advanced Metabots games who didn't get here in the West. They were on the graphics team. Power Rangers Wild Force in the Game Boy Advanced artwork. WWE Road to WrestleMania X8 artwork, so they're largely on the art team. Metabots AX, Metabee, and Rakusho, they were on the art team, so probably sprite work in general. Mega Man 04, they were on the special thanks for Natsume. Power Rangers SPD, 2D artwork, you're seeing a trend here. They're on the art teams pretty much universally. And specifically, they were also on the character graphics team for King of Fighters 13, the game that had such absurdly detailed 2D sprite work animations due to the workflow of it that it was so expensive that it almost caused SNK to go bankrupt, and technically partially led to them being bought by a specific political royal family that I'm not going to comment about, but oh boy. After KOF, though, Tomoki Hamuro's most recent projects are being CG character designers for Disgaea 4, as well as Disgaea 5. Teruyuki Hirooka is next up on the list of design team members. They started on Sylvania Melodies Mori no Nakaman to Odorimasho on the Game Boy Color, then they were also on Medarot Navi. After that, they were on Metabots, Metabee, and Rakusho, as well as AX as an art team member, so I've actually covered that game before in the past. Power Rangers Dino Thunder, same deal. Character staff for Natsume in general on 04. And their most recent projects are Disgaea 4 as a character designer, as well as ZHP Unlosing Ranger vs. Dark Death Evil Man, which off the top of my head, I think is a tactics RPG that was originally released on the PSP. Neat. Next up is Daisuke Sakane. Their first credit in general was on Medarot Navi, and there's a lot of that going around here. They were also on the art team for Metabots, Rakusho, Metabee, and AX, so these are a lot of Natsume people. Mega Man 04, background designer for Natsume in specific even. Their most recent projects are all from 2006, which are this, Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island, and Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins on the PSP. Satoshi Ueda is next up on the docket. They started on Sylvania Melodies as well, and then they were also on the same Metabots games and Power Rangers games we've talked about, as well as KOF 13, Disgaea 4, Street Fighter 5. They were a character modeler, and they're also character artists for Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 and The Breakers. Haruo Ueda only worked on this, Fullmetal Alchemist Dual Sympathy on the DS, and Power Rangers Dino Thunder on the GBA. Hiroko Yagi worked on Fisherman's Bags Club on the PS2, the Fullmetal Alchemist game, this, and KOF 12 and 13. Yoshimi Ueda worked most recently on Disgaea 5 Complete and ZHP's Windows port, but it was also on Disgaea 4 and 5, as well as KOF 13. And The World Ends With You, they were also a character artist. Finally, for the design team, there's Takumi Nakamura. They started on Project Horndal on the PS1. They were on Xenosaga Episode 1's development team as an event effects designer. Same with Xenosaga 2. They were on this. They worked as a VFX designer on Folklore, character arts on KOF 13. Pokepark 2 Wonders Beyond, they were on the Pokemon animation team. Disgaea D2, they were a battle scene editor, and their most recent credits are Pokemon Sword as a graphic designer for special effects, Nier Reincarnation as a 3D artist, and Xenoblade 3 working with Brush Up Co. Limited. So this level brings something up. I love this game's soundtrack on the large. Heck, the Squeak Squad theme themselves that plays whenever you grab a large chest and a Squeak shows up is one of my favorite tracks in Kirby history. Except for this song. This song hurts my ears. And it's so weirdly, like, out of tone, I think, compared to the rest of the soundtrack, because a lot of the rest of the soundtrack is very high energy. That song feels like I'm about to get jump scared for the first time in a bad Resident Evil clone on the PlayStation 2. I don't know what's up with that. But that does give me a good transition to the next part of the dev team, the sound team, made up of Hirokazu Ando, Jun Ishikawa, Tadashi Ikegami, and Shogo Sakai. All four of them have some pretty good listings of credits, upwards of 40 plus roles. Starting off with Hirokazu Ando, they started on Arcana on the Super Nintendo as a composer, then they worked on basically every Kirby game and Smash game, starting from Kirby's Adventure all the way up to Kirby in the Forgotten Land and Dream Buffet as a lead musician and sound team member. Other standouts in there are Bye Bye Box Boy, they were on the sound team, P-Cross 3D, technically I Want to Be the Guy, the movie, the game, by extension. Largely, if Kirby was in a thing, they worked on the music for it. Similarly with Jun Ishikawa, basically every single Smash game they were supervisor or on the sound team. Basically every Kirby game, the same thing. Adventures of Lolo 3, they were a composer. New Ghostbusters 2. A lot of the same deals. So if you've played a game that has Kirby in it, you've probably heard their music before. Tadashi Ikigami, similar story, but lesser credit count. While they're still working with Kirby to this day, heck, they composed the main theme song, Welcome to the New World, for that game. They only do largely seemingly one song per game nowadays, because they also did the ending song for Super Kirby Clash. Box Boy, they were in the special thanks. Smash Wii U, they were a supervisor. Squeak Squad, they were on the sound team. Epic Yarn, they were on the sound team. They were in the special thanks for Pokemon Ranger, but they started on Kirby's Pinball Land on the Game Boy as staff, and they were then a composer from Wario's Woods Beyond. Shogo Sakai wraps out the sound team for this, and they did a lot of various work on NES games at the start of their career. Donald Land, Rampage, Captain Silver, Glory of Heracles 2, RoboCop, Boulder Dash. They were all over the place on sound teams going into the Genesis era with Vapor Trail, Midnight Resistance, Captain America and the Adventures, later Glory of Heracles games all the way up to Glory of Heracles 4. Around the turn of the millennium, though, they were working on things like Virtua Fighter 2, Melee, they were on the music team, Air Ride on Moving Forward, they started being with a lot of Kirby-adjacent projects. They were notably the lone soundtrack composer, from my memory, for Mother 3, the same year as Squeak Squad. Sound team for Brawl, Mass Attack, Abobo's Big Adventure by definition, technically. But their most recent projects are things like P-Cross 3D Round 2 on the 3DS, Rainbow Curse, Part-Time UFO, Ultimate, and Kirby's Dream Buffet. This is one of the times they want you to really use Wheel for its speed in the game, and it's good because considering Doc can get to the walls pretty easily, if you're just trying to ignore the Wheel ability, you're probably going to have to chase Doc into the building to get the large chest here otherwise. And I actually don't remember if this level gives us anything super notable in the chests, so let's take a look at what we get here. A Vitality Piece and another copy palette, which I believe, swap to every copy palette as I get it just to showcase it. Which does lead into something I briefly talked about offhandedly earlier in the LP already. There are actively unused copy palettes for the bottom screen that are just unused in the game by default. All four of them should be showing up on screen right now in some form or manner. The thing is, you could access them, but only in Japan, because they were distributed by DS download kiosks. So if you were at a store in Japan that had that kiosk, you could download and use those with the DS download play thing. But to my knowledge, the kiosks with that specific cartridge were never in the States. So if you want to get those copy palettes, somehow you got to resort to Action Replay, Game Shark adjacent shenanigans, or hack the game properly. Which is interesting because, to my knowledge, a lot of the cartridges that did things like that at demo kiosks have been found and preserved over the years, but that one just hasn't last I checked. Also kind of reminds me of the old, what was the channel on the Wii that let you do something like that? I think it may have just been called the Nintendo channel. I remember that one specifically due to having to get an exclusive Mega Man Star Force 3 battle card on it that was absurdly powerful. But I'll save more on that topic for when I eventually get to Star Force 3, which I gotta do Star Force 1 and 2 first. Star Force 1 probably starts soon-ish, if I had to guess, maybe. I don't know. I want to do that before I move on to the next Battle Network, as I probably mentioned at the end of that LP. Or re-LP, rather, but with Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire going as long as it did, I have not had time to start another RPG yet for the channel. A moment ago, by the way, we took care of what I think is probably the second worst Golden Waddle Dee in the game, if only because the room that you have to sprint up to it in is curvy enough where if you're not using something like Tornado or Wheel to catch up, there's a good chance it might actively make it all the way to the pit, which just sucks. Though thankfully, to my memory, Kirby's running speed is still faster than a Waddle Dee, so you don't have to worry too much, but it's still real rough if you miss it. This specific crab mini-boss, I don't know the name of, by the way, is the one that holds Bubble. We actively have Bubble's ability scroll now, which allows us to do that little ability that we just did there, I believe. Which is effectively just a guaranteed bubbling on a lot of weaker enemies from the get-go at a larger speed and distance. But again, inventory limit-wise, Bubble's not a very useful ability. So, oh well. Up in this next room, we actually have another ability for fire that doesn't come up too often in the game. This game actively has metal blocks that fire abilities exclusively can melt, which took me a while to really figure out for some reason, because I couldn't really figure out a difference between why fire would work on those, but not the metal blocks that, like, Hammer or the Meteor ability of fire can destroy. It always just kind of weirded me out as a kid, I won't lie. But it's at the point now where I just don't question it, because I know it's there. We're going to be seeing those kind of blocks a couple of times moving forward. Heck, I forget if it already happened or not. There's at least one room in the game where you need to keep those in mind on top of the darker rooms in the game that you need to use fire or laser to light up a candle in. I think we've seen one of those already, I just didn't comment on it because I was talking about the staff at that point in time. Upon grabbing this specific chest, we're gonna have to run away from Storo once again, but this is one of the times they've once again forced us into a mini-boss against him. Unfortunately, this is a real bad room for him, because not only do I have a fire breath ability, which can really lock him against a wall, he can also take damage from the electric sparks at the edge of the room. Worth noting with especially with Storo, but I think it happens with the rest of the Squeaks as well. If you damage them when they're on the ground slightly unconscious, they'll actively drop health items for you, which can be pretty good to rely on for healing at the end of certain stages. But it really depends on them if you want to actively fight them, which, again, if you're not going for 100%, you don't need to worry about too much. Though there are notably some chests you do need to get to finish the game. More on that later. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4, we're going to finish off Jam Jungle before moving on to World 5. See you guys then.